There's a great story by a guy named Michael Bird. He tells about the days when he was a young soldier in the Australian Army. He said one Friday night, he and a few of his mates were ordered to guard a truck loaded with ammunition. He said, as you can imagine, most young men had other things planned rather than guarding a truck on a Friday night. He said that they sat around moping and not terribly pleased with the situation. He said, into the night, an old man in a tank top and a pair of shorts approached, asking why everybody looked so frustrated. He said, we told him the stupid job we had and how we'd rather be out partying with our friends. And the old man just kind of hung around and visited with us and asked about what we did and our unit and some of the officers. We just told him a bunch of stuff we weren't happy about. And he asked us, well, speaking of those officers, what do you make about that new commanding officer? And we told him that he was some pencil-pushing loser from Canberra who hadn't yet met, and some guy named Lieutenant Colonel Power. He then asked my name, and I told him, and I asked his name, and he said to me, my name is Bob Power. He said it didn't click automatically, and I said, hey, that's amazing. That's the same name as our new... Suddenly it dawned on me that this was our new commanding officer. My mind was filled with horrendous images of cutting the lawn with a pair of nail clippers or washing the floors with my toothbrush. Lucky for me, Colonel Power had a sense of humor. And then he ended by saying this. One thing I did learn from that episode was that my relationship with him changed radically when I realized who he was and the extent of his authority. When I realized who he was and the extent of his authority. I don't know what it is in our culture. I wish I could put my finger on it, but in our effort to try to create loving dialogue with people with whom we differ, there is this subtle little thing that sneaks in. I'm ahead of myself. Let me back up for a second. The same eye-opening experience that this guy had when he realized who Bob Power was is the same moment that we have when we read Colossians. Paul is writing a letter to a 6-year-old church plant. Guess how old CPC is? 6. He's writing this letter to a church the same age as us. It's located, as you can see on the map, in present-day Turkey. The church was flourishing, except that it had been infiltrated with some false teachers who started speaking lies. Eugene Peterson has a great introduction to this letter to the Colossians. Look on the screen, I put it up there for you. He says, hardly anyone who hears the full story of Jesus and learns the true facts of his life and teaching, crucifixion and resurrection, walks away with a shrug of the shoulders, dismissing him as unimportant. People ignorant of the story or misinformed about it, of course, regularly dismiss him. But with few exceptions, the others know instinctively that they are dealing with a most remarkable greatness. But it is quite common for those who consider Jesus truly important to include others who seem to be equally important in his company. Buddha, Moses, Socrates, Mohammed, for a historical start. For these people, Jesus is important, but not central. His prestige is considerable, but he is not preeminent. The Christians in the town of Colossae, or at least some of them, seem to have been taking this line. Paul writes to them in an attempt to restore Jesus, the Messiah, to the center of their lives. Now, let me say what I'd started saying before. I don't know how this happens in our culture, but in our effort to try to connect with one another, to be kind to one another, to create this loving dialogue with people with whom we differ, there is this subtle lie that can easily slip into our thinking. And that lie is that all religions are basically accomplishing a similar end. They're all trying to find God. That's the lie. A Nobel Prize, Peace Prize nominee named Sharif Basouini, a law professor at DePaul University in Chicago, said that all religions lead to God using different paths. Look at his quote. The judgment is not by the choice we make, but by how we pursue the path of the choice we make. Different religions and cultures are equal in the eyes of God and should be seen as equal in the eyes of man. But in this study of the book of Colossians, this letter that Paul wrote to this young 6-year-old church plant, we get an entirely different message than what that Nobel Peace Prize nominee just said. In fact, God inspired Paul to write of Jesus' preeminence, of Jesus' supremacy, that Jesus Christ is superior to all other human beings, that he is superior to all created gods, that he is superior to all religious and philosophical systems, that he is superior to all universal powers, that Jesus Christ is absolutely without parallel. And I think it's equally important that not one thing that Paul says about Jesus, Jesus didn't already say about himself. I think that's significant because of the other main religions of the world. Their leaders never made these kind of bold claims. You guys, Buddha never claimed to be God. Muhammad never claimed to be anything more than a prophet. Abraham and Moses, the patriarchs of Judaism, they never claimed to be anything more than human beings. Christ supreme is Jesus' claim. It's unlike any other claim made by any other leader or religious founder. Look what Jesus said about himself. This is John chapter 14, starting in the second part of verse 9. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me, who is doing his work. A couple of chapters later, several chapters later, in chapter 17, he would actually say that the Father and I are one. So Paul's claim in this letter to the Colossians is not a new claim. Jesus already made this claim, and you guys, he backed it up by a sinless life and a sacrificial death and a resurrection from the grave and an ascension into heaven that was witnessed by human eyes. Those are just the big four. He did a lot of other stuff that proved he was the Son of God while he walked the face of the earth too. Some scholars say that Colossians is the most Christ-centered book of all of the books in the Bible. You know what? I think that's right. I think this book that we're about to study, I think it's the most Christ-centered of any of them. Paul uses the word Christ 26 times, and he uses the word Lord 13 times. And that's a very large number of occurrences in a short little letter made up of 4 chapters. And Paul is giving the church, this church plant, just like he's giving all of the rest of us who are going to read this letter or study this letter, he's giving us the medicine of truth when we face the sickness of false teaching. This is what we take. This is the remedy. When exposed to false teaching, you need to expose yourself to this medicine. There are 2 main areas. Some might argue that there are 3 and maybe even more, but I've just called it down into 2. And you're reading through Colossians, you may come and correct me, and that's okay. I need correction a lot of the times. But I think there are mainly 2 areas of false teaching that Paul addresses in this letter. One is this area called Gnosticism. Gnosticism, you can see that's where we get our word knowledge. And there was a basic worship of a higher attainment of knowledge. That some people are given answers to mysteries and given explanations to things unknown. So the goal is knowledge. Knowledge is the goal. Knowledge is the end. Knowledge is the God. I think sometimes we bump up to that a little bit sometimes in the way we view education. Education is good. We all need it. But sometimes it can get out of whack and it can become the end all. So there's one. And another false teaching that infiltrated the Colossian church was legalism, and we understand that. Legalism, worshiping what is more centered on what humans do than on what Jesus did. In other words, holding rules and regulations before God was seen more important than having a relationship with God. And I do think that it's interesting that the other religions of the world don't emphasize a relationship with the founder. You see, Buddhists stress the teachings of Buddha. They don't stress anything about having a relationship with Buddha. And Islam stresses the teachings of Muhammad. They don't stress anything about having a relationship with Muhammad. Yet only Christianity has a giant emphasis on knowing God. Philippians chapter 3 and verse 10. That's what Paul says. I want to know Christ. And in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 23, when there's this great separation at the end of time and the final judgment, and God is saying, you come with me, and what does he say to some people? I never knew you. Away from me. It's all based. Christianity stresses relationship above rules and regulations. Besides, isn't the real reason the relationship with Jesus is possible because he's alive? Buddha is dead. Muhammad is dead. The fact that Jesus is alive immediately makes him supreme. Look how Paul begins this letter in Colossians. Flash up those first two verses. You see there's a greeting. You can skim over that quickly. Go to this next section, verses 3 through 8. I've kind of highlighted some of the points for you. Paul is offering prayers of thanksgiving for them, thanking God for their faith in him. A faith that they likely learned from Epaphras. That name is probably the guy that planted the church in Colossae. We don't have any record in Acts or in any of Paul's writings that he ever went to Colossae. I think Epaphras is a significant figure here. Paul thanked God that their faith was growing and bearing fruit, and for the love that they had for all the saints. That would be the love that they had for fellow believers. Then the next section, Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 through 14. Same thing highlighted. After thanking God in prayer for their faith and love, Paul petitions God in prayer for their knowledge of his will. You see that? For living a life worthy of the Lord. For being full of fruit of good works, for that God would strengthen them with power specifically that would give them endurance, that would give them patience, and that would give them the joy of knowing that they got an inheritance waiting for them in the kingdom of light. You see that? And then also that they've been rescued from the dominion of darkness. Dude, this is a great prayer. If you want to pray somebody over somebody, there's your text, Colossians 1, 9 through 14. And then we come to verse 15. We find our direction in not being deceived by false teaching. Okay, you guys, I'm going to tell you the answer right now. Before we even get into this verse, I'm going to tell you the answer on how we can counter false teaching. Here's the answer. You put your eyes on Jesus and you don't look away. What about the other things? Y'all, we don't look anywhere else. Do you know why? Because nowhere else is all truth found. Now, this isn't a man-made claim. This is his claim. He said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. You want to combat false teaching? Then you believe his claim that he wasn't lying, that he wasn't crazy, but he was telling you the truth. He embodies truth. So you put your gaze on him, you fix your attention on him, and you refuse to look away. There's the bottom line. There's the answer on how to combat false teaching. Okay, look at Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is God's image. Look at this great text in John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. What's the Word? The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. The Word is Jesus, who came from the Father, full of the perfect balance of grace and truth. How could Jesus be the image of an invisible God? There's only one explanation for that. He is God. There's no way around it. The only way he can be the image. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 3, it says that he is the exact representation of God. The only explanation for that is he is God. That's number one. He's God's image. Number two starts in the second part of verse 15. Look what it says. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. He's creation's firstborn. Now we have to be careful here because our English language misleads us. You see, that term firstborn is a Hebrew idiom that actually is a common title of honor. It is also the title of Messiah, God's anointed. This is not a reference saying Jesus was God's first person to create. Jesus was never created. He always is. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. Let us, in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image. They were always together. They is really one, so it's not that they always are, it's that God, Jesus, and the Spirit, they always is one. Okay, firstborn of over all creation. It means before creation. He would come in human form and be born in Bethlehem in a manger, but he came from everlasting to be born in Bethlehem in a manger. He came from eternity. Now I realize, I speak of things of which I know not. The understanding of this just, goes over. So you know what? We just take it in faith. Somehow that little baby born in a manger in Bethlehem is God. And I believe it. And I believe it. He said it, we believe it. Okay, that's the second point. Creation's firstborn. Now, number 3 comes in verse 16. Look what it says. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So Jesus is creation's creator. And you know, when you're creation's creator, the winds and the waves obey you. And disease and death have no sway over you. Creation's creator is omnipotent. There is no power in the universe comparable. You're creation's creator. So we've got God's image, we've got creation's firstborn, we've got creation's creator. Now look at verse 18. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Jesus is the church head. This church belongs to him. CPC belongs to him. Every Christian church in the world is his. He is the head of the body of believers in him. No man is the head. You think I'm the head of this church? If I'm the head of this church is in big trouble. No man is the head. No family is the head. No understanding is the head. No location is the head. No doctrinal understanding is the head. No name is the head. No sectarian group is the head. Jesus is the head. He died for the church. He purchased the church with his blood. He fills the church with the Holy Spirit. He tells the church where to go and what to do. And one day he'll return to take the church home. Why? Because he's the head. He's supreme. I think we need to begin to have no ambiguity about this. We look at Jesus and we refuse to look anywhere else. Colossians exposes the false teaching of religious equality. Did you just say that in America? We are always kind. We are always respectful. We're always loving to people of all religions. That's a given. That was shown us by our Master himself. When he was asked about an evil Roman Empire, how did he respond? Render to Caesar what is Caesar, but give to God what is God's. We give respect and honor to every person, no matter where his allegiance lies. With that said, there is no one and nothing that will ever approach the supremacy of Jesus. False teaching can so easily deceive us. You guys, a Christian isn't ruined by living in the world. A Christian is ruined by the world living in them. Wallace Chappell tells a great story about a college student named Elizabeth. She came home after a semester. She took a course called Religions of the World. And she says she was enlightened. She was so excited to share this with her pastor. She got with him and she said, listen, I need to tell you, after I've taken this course, my eyes have been opened. I'm not interested in a God who saves me. I'm more attracted to a God who identifies with me. And that pastor gently said, Elizabeth, may I ask you a question? She said, certainly. He said, imagine yourself on the 8th floor of a hotel and the building catches on fire. The elevators do not function and the stairwell is filled with flame. There is absolutely no escape for you at all. But because of the bravery of some young firemen, at great risk to themselves, they managed to climb up extended ladders all the way to your window in the 8th floor. And they take that axe and they break out the window, and there you are, and there's that fireman reaching out to you. At what point do you want that fireman to just identify with you or save you? You guys, this life is not about somebody identifying with me. This is about me finding out who he is. Do I want God to identify with me? God, what did you create me to be? Who am I? Show me the path to take so that I can fulfill my deepest potential. That is such a self-focused religion. God, do whatever you want with me. I don't care. Have me live wherever you want me to live. I don't care what you... Just let me know you. There is no one like you. Now that is religion. That's true religion. That's truth. It's not about us. Look at Acts chapter 4 and verse 12. Christ is supreme because salvation is found in no one else. That is not man's claim. That is Creator's truth. Look at 1 Corinthians 3 verse 11. Christ is supreme because there is no other foundation upon which to build. There is no amount of knowledge or rule keeping that can bring purpose or meaning to this life or position us to a good standing with God the Father. Christ is supreme in every way, and He is without parallel. So when we face the disease of false teaching, the only medicine is the word of truth, which is Jesus. And the only way to counter false teaching is to look at Him and to refuse to look away. I'm not taking my eyes off of Him. Because Christ is supreme. Christ supreme.